Hi gang, John O'Brien here, your video professor for a while. As you know, our in-class courses have moved online. So this course among them will use this modality until further notice. So please watch the video through the YouTube link. Leave questions at the bottom with respect to the material in the video, like, hey, I didn't understand what you said about X, Y, or Z, or I didn't know that Russia industrialized, something like that, something about the material in today's lecture or every lecture. And I'll answer them the next time I do this. I will pull up the questions and read them and try to respond to them. The modality has changed not only with respect to YouTube lectures, but also we can't test you in class. I will still do the online quizzes, but the other two exams that were supposed to be done in class, can't do them in class, right? We're going to be social distancing. So you will do those as take-homes. They will be only comprised of the essay questions, but since you'll have a week in a book and notes from our lectures to do your essays, more is going to be expected, right? So we'll have word process essays that I'll put out the question and we do a week afterwards. We will also have group presentations. For the folks who have not done the group presentations, I'm going to ask you to continue to work together, at least online. We don't have to all get in the same place. Work online through Google Docs and create a slideshow that I can post so all of us can kind of view it, and then we will evaluate it with that same group assessment sheet. So all of that's explained in the revised syllabus. It's in the content section of Blackboard. Please ask me questions in YouTube, the YouTube comments area about the revised syllabus or about this lecture. In the Blackboard discussion forum, please try to answer my questions, right? Or maybe pose your own, but those would relate specifically to the lecture. In this case, Society of Crossroads. So we'll see in the mid to late 19th century, that's 1800s, right? Out of 4 societies, 3 really slowed down, right? 3 really stagnated. They being the Ottoman Empire, the Russian Empire, and China. One, however, the 4th one, will, in a sense, do a 180-degree turn. That will be Japan. That after 1867 will industrialize, modernize, not really liberalize its politics, but it will nonetheless militarize and in fact become an imperial nation. So it will try to beat the so-called West, Europe and the United States, at its own game. So that'll be our topic for today and really through the week. So we're going to stay on schedule here. We're just doing it via video instead of in person, which means that those who really want to can watch this more than one time, or at least rewind it and see what I said when I'm moving so quickly here. Try to keep up with current events as well, because they're obviously impacting you. The Federal Reserve, that's the Department of Government that sets our monetary policy, slashes interest rates to near zero. So hey, good time to take a loan. Why are they doing that? Because they want people to take loans to buy houses and cars and other big ticket items to keep the economy going. As you see, restaurants are closing down. It's not only schools, but businesses really closing down, except for toilet paper manufacturers for some unknown reason. But anyway, so the government's trying to keep the economy going, right? So offering low interest loans. So try to keep up with the news, keep up with the real news. I mean, keep up with the facts. This COVID-19 is really serious. Don't make light of it. I know there are people out there, ha ha ha, going out and drinking anyway. Look, be smart. We haven't seen anything like this for 100 years. 1918, 1919, there was a major flu pandemic that killed about 50 million people around the world, okay? And if you think, I'm young, nothing's gonna happen to me, your roommate might have an underlying medical condition, right? Your grandparents probably don't have the best respiration, okay? So think about others. Let's try to, what they say, flatten the curve so there is not a peak in COVID-19 cases all at once that might overwhelm our hospitals. There are doctors in Italy right now trying to make a decision who to save and who to let die, because there are too many people going to too few hospitals, all right? So we're trying to minimize the number of people who get infected all at once. A lot of people might be infected, but it might be over a longer period of time that will allow our health facilities to cope. All right, so stay healthy out there, all right? And let's try to keep on, keep calm and keep on as much as we can. All right, I know there's gonna be some technological quirks here as I adjust to this format. Yes, okay, whoops, there we go. Please go ahead. All right, Societies at Crossroads. So, looking at four societies, Russia, the Ottoman Empire, China, and Japan, three of them kind of stagnate or slow down. One of them, Japan, modernizes. This is in the latter half of the 1800s or 19th century. So, by the 19th century, the Ottoman Empire faced major challenges. It was slowly disintegrating. It was a big jigsaw puzzle coming apart. Why? Because each piece was claimed by a different ethnic group. The Greeks are going to break away. The Egyptians are going to break away. The Serbians are going to break away, right? Different peoples, ethnic groups want their own nation. What's that called? Yes, it's called nationalism. I know we saw it in France coming out of 1898. Now we see it in other parts of the world where this is my nation. Why am I living under a foreign ruler who might not respect my religion, my language, my culture? Right? So the Ottoman Empire was facing a slow disintegration. In fact, by the late 19th century, it's known as the sick man of Europe. Russia, incomplete industrialization. The Russians, under an absolutist, right, a czar, means emperor or Caesar, had not experienced a French-style political revolution. Thus, it's one man with a whole lot of power. Beneath him, a whole lot of landlords with a lot of power, at least in their local areas. Beneath them, a whole lot of serf people, S-E-R-F, serf. These were essentially, you might consider them slaves. They weren't typically bought and sold, but you couldn't leave your landlord's property. You owed your landlord labor, okay? So there was a lack of a middle class, a lack of political liberalization. It's the ancien regime, or the old order, in Russia. Izvinite, I don't know how to say that in Russian, but anyway, right? So, and an autocracy intact, right? One man rule, lack of factories. If you don't have factories, you don't have a middle class. You don't have bankers and factory owners and investors, right? You don't have a middle class. China, foreign intervention. Yeah, China also autocratic, right? One person rule, a lack of democratization, a lack of industrialization, this very conservative Confucian bureaucracy holding China back, in a sense, if we consider industrialization in advance, holding China back. Okay? Japan will engage in major reform because Japan will be cracked open by an aggressive United States after 1867. Okay? And Japan will respond by modernizing, by bringing in factories and railroads and banks and tariffs, and really taxing its own people in order to fund American engineers and European architects coming in to make factories and build railroads, etc. So Japan will industrialize, but will also, if I can coin a term, imperialize, right? Take those factory-produced weapons and then dominate its neighbors in Korea, in China, in Russia, at least Eastern Russia. Okay? So that's the theme for this chapter. Territorial losses of the Ottoman Empire, 1800 to 1914. Right? By the way, I will also put all of these slides into Blackboard contents. So if it's a little tough to see this, I realize, right? You can get my voice and look at the outline, seam outline. So big Ottoman Empire with 1500, it's huge, and then pieces start to break off, right? So in 1800, it's still huge. Territorial loss, 1800, 1877. The orange. Part of Tunisia, Greece here. Greece in 1830 had a revolution. Why are we Greek people living under Turkish rule? We're Orthodox Christian. They're Sunni Muslim for the most part, although they tended to be tolerant. We look different than the Turks. We speak different language than the Turks. They tax us. They mistreat us. We're going to rebel. And in fact, a lot of the romantics, like the romantic poets, like Lord Byron from England, goes to Greece to fight for Greek independence because he loved, the Greek literature and philosophy, right? So actually the Russians and the British get involved in helping the Greeks to break off from the Ottoman Empire. Up here, keep an eye on this. Serbia, we're Serbian, we're Orthodox Christians, we're Slavic people, we're not Turkish Muslims. Why shouldn't we have our own country? They will also break off, but just foreshadowing here, they don't get all of what they want. They get this piece in orange from the Ottoman Empire, but they want this green piece that will be claimed by these folks, the Austro-Hungarian Empire. That'll, in fact, be the context for the coming of World War I in 1914. So keep an eye on that region called the Balkans, B-A-L-K-A-N-S. Let's look more closely at the Ottoman Empire. It's in decline, really from the late 18th century to the 19th. Why? Well, the Ottoman Empire got big. And you can't get big after a while, right? You get overextended. So if you conquer more territory, you can gain its wealth. But eventually you become overextended, right? It's like those of you who might be working 40 hours and going to school full time, like you just can't take on any more, right? Ottoman Empire, to oversimplify, likewise, it got too big. It fell behind militarily. So remember, in the Ottoman Empire, you have one man with all political power called the Sultan. We talked about Suleiman the Magnificent back in the 16th century. But that Sultan actually did have to bargain, so to speak, with religious conservatives who didn't want to mechanize, who didn't want things like telescopes and printing presses, because those were seen as heathen or at least dangerous to their religious conservatism. Well, if you don't get books, and if you don't study physics, and you don't have factories that make cannons, you're really prey to the people who do that stuff, right? When you don't study physics, and your enemy does, they can put a cannonball right on your head, okay, to oversimplify. So militarily, the Ottomans had fallen behind the West. They still had, in the early 19th century, those janissaries, right? Those enslaved soldiers who were nonetheless loyal to the Sultan. But they wanted to fight the old way. They wanted to like climb through the mud like some grunt with a rifle, right? They wanted to fight with, feathers and, feathery hats and swords, okay? And they suffered losses. Greece, as we noted, broke away in 1830. The Balkans, especially Serbia, broke away in 1778. Egypt, the same decade. Economic capitulation. So again, we essentialize in this course, which means we try to simplify everything. But basically, the Ottomans allowed foreigners to come to dominate their own economies. Instead of making their own stuff, for a while they had enough money to import everything. And they might give you a license. All the tea sold in the Ottoman Empire will be sold by you, your company, or your country, okay? And if you give me $1 million, you get the license to sell all the tea in my country for the next 100 years. Well, that's a capitulation, right? Awesome, I get $1 million, but for the next 100 years, my people can't make tea, or whatever else it might be. Rifles, probably more important than tea, right? They begin to import their weapons from Europeans, and believe me, Europeans aren't going to sell them the best stuff. It's all the outdated, junky stuff. Right? So, economic capitulations. And in fact, eventually the Ottomans have to borrow money, right, to buy foreign goods. There'd be corruption in the ranks of the ruling class, right? The Ottoman sultans would often become corrupt. Well, why not? There's no check on your power. There's no parliament. There's no impeachment process, right? As long as you don't anger the religious conservative leadership, you're okay. Janissary revolts. Well, these enslaved soldiers, so to speak, that fought, very in a stylistic way, didn't want the modern methods. Even when the sultans wanted to modernize their army, the soldiers wouldn't go along with it. So there's revolts. Mahmud II tried to westernize the country. He's like, I see the problem. We need to be more like Germany or Britain, right? Have a navy, have an army. They failed, right? Religious conservatives said, no, these reforms, Hazamat reforms, they're heathen. We shouldn't go in this direction. Everything we need to know is already in the Quran. We don't need to study Darwin, okay? Look at what Darwin's saying. We descended from monkeys, which is not exactly what he said, but this is how it's interpreted, right? So science was seen as dangerous by these conservatives, and it meant their society is going to fall behind the West. Abdul Hamid, this dude right here, right? Despotic rule, mean rule. He's actually going to be overthrown by reformers. Some Turkish men, again, very patriarchal society, some Turkish men had an opportunity to travel abroad. And they brought back ideas from France. Liberty, equality, fraternity, right? From Britain. Industry, Germany. Hey, let's see, what year is this? In Germany, hey, do you know the German government is giving health care to its workers? Skilled workers covered by the government's health care. These are like foreign ideas that are brought back to the Ottoman Empire by these so-called young Turks. Not all of them are very young, but their ideas are kind of young. Right? They take over, right? They take over, and unfortunately, lead the Ottoman Empire into World War I. Okay, so modernizing, we need to be modern, and we're going to go to war like a modern nation, because we have weapons. They begin to build weapons, but not enough, and not as sophisticated as those of the West. They will enter, in a sense, the wrong side in World War I, and for devastating results as we'll see. So by 1900, the sick man of Europe, the sickness for the Ottomans is really not only a lack of industrialization and modernization, but the pieces of the Ottoman Empire wanting to go their own way, like the Greeks had left, and the Serbs had left, the Romanians, the Hungarians, the Arabs are all going to want to leave and form their own nations. So the tricky thing about nationalism is, nationalism can bring your country together, but it also can divide it. If you're French, if you see everyone around you is French, vive la France, right? We all have baguettes, we sing the Marseillaise, hey, we're all French, we hate these foreign invaders, right? Then you're united by nationalism. Or think about Bismarck's Germany, Prussia, and Schleswig-Holstein, and these other cool sounding places, right? We're all German, we're mostly Lutheran, yes, there's some Catholics, but we have Hansel and Gretel, and I mean, in some ways all those stereotypes, right? That folk tradition, we're all one, you can unite Germany, you can unite France. What if in your country you have all these different ethnic groups, and each of them want their own country? That country's going bye-bye, right? It's going to be like a jigsaw puzzle that falls apart. Similarly, although not covered in this chapter, the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Well, just in the name, I see two ethnic groups, right? Austrian and Hungarian. And there were Serbian and Romanian, Ruthenian and Bosnian and Herzegovinian and Montenegrin and many others, okay? If each of them gets their own country, say bye-bye to the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So this will be another reason for World War I, future chapter, okay? So nationalism can unite or divide. So Ottoman Empire, sick man of Europe, the sickness really is a lack of modernization coupled with these kind of ethnic divisions whereby every nationality, almost everyone, wants its own nation. Meanwhile, in Russia, right, when? Up to World War I. So we're using this date, 1914. That's the outbreak, I should say, the outbreak of the war in Europe, 1914, the Great War. They didn't call it World War I during the conflict. It's called the Great War, okay? So here's Russia. I mean, it's huge. Huge. An era before Twitter. How do you govern this thing? Yeah, well, that's the problem the Tsar's going to face, right? The Tsar is actually based here, St. Petersburg. This is Peter the Great's window to the west. So, hey, what's going on in the west? Well, Peter the Great, and this is actually in this, the 17th century, modernizes the Russian army, but this is 1600s, right? By 1800s, it's going to be outdated. Russia really had lagged behind. So we have a ruler, a Tsar, royal, autocrat with all real power, no real parliament, no real Supreme Court, Orthodox Church, which in many ways was controlled by the Tsar anyway, and wealthy landlords, okay, governing their local territories, beneath them serfs. Again, S-E-R-F. These are people who were almost enslaved. Okay? Lack of education, lack of owning much, working for the landlord, paying taxes to the government and rent to the landlord. Okay? Very difficult lives. What's going to happen? Russia's going to suffer military defeat in Russia, right? Russia had fallen behind the West, and it was made clear by this Crimean War. And the Crimean Peninsula, let's go back one, right? If I can do this, way over, this way here, okay? Over here, we'll have a war between Russia versus France and Britain. And you might think, well, Russia's big, Russia's powerful. It's in Russia, after all, Russia's going to win. That's what the Russians thought, but they lose, okay? Because France and Britain had industrialized, had steam-powered boats and rifles, okay, made in factories, and they were able to win this war. It showed that Russia had fallen behind, right? This multi-ethnic empire with a one-man ruling it all had fallen behind the West, fallen behind the industrialized nations, and also behind the liberalized nations, okay? It's not just factories, it's participatory government. So it's two things, right? Coming from previous chapters, it's liberalization coming out of things like the French Revolution, where at least some of the people get a voice in the government, and it's industrialization coming out of Britain, okay? Those are twin revolutions. Russia didn't experience them, Okay? So there's one man with all real power and not even any factories to make guns. Well, we're exaggerating a bit, right? So these serfs, notice how it's spelled under the ruling elite, lose the war, okay? Western coalition. What happens? That's going to lead the Russian rulers to think, what's happened to Mother Russia? We've fallen behind. We need to make changes, okay? Tsar Alexander II, during the American Civil War, interestingly enough, the 1860s, frees the serfs. Enslaved people, you are now free. Your landlord doesn't own your labor anymore. Awesome. But what are they going to do? They don't own land. They don't have money. They don't have an education. There are no factories to go get them. I'm going to leave the farm and go to a job in a factory. There are no factories. So it doesn't really change much. It doesn't end the misery of the poor farmers. Similarly, and somewhat controversially, Civil War frees in the United States 4 million enslaved people. And that's great, right? They have freedom of movement. But materially, what did that mean? No one owned them anymore, but they had no education by law. They didn't own land because no one was going to give them land. The radical Republicans in Congress wanted to do it, but it was too radical for the era. It was too socialist. Okay? So no land, no education, no money. Many formerly enslaved persons in the United States became sharecroppers. In a sense, they became enslaved, which, yes, might have been a step up, but it's certainly not fully free. When your landlord owns your labor, when you have to borrow $50 from your landlord to buy seed and tools and a mule, and then your crop only brings in $40 worth of profit, you fall behind to your landlord year after year after year, and you can never get free until you work off your debt. Okay? That's what happens in sharecropping, which will characterize the American South and keep the American South backward and with a lack of industry and really a lack of political rights. Yes, we know African American men, former slaves, get the right to vote for a short time during Reconstruction, but terrorists in the South will put an end to that franchise, right? The KKK. So the situation in Russia and the southern United States, in some ways, a little, somewhat similar. Interesting at the same time. So, what are we going to do in Russia? The Tsar brings in Sergei Vit, looks like wit, but it's Vit, who says we need railroads, we need banks, we need tariffs. If you're a U.S. history student, especially in History 1540, you talk about tariffs all the time, right? What the hell is a tariff? Tariff is a tax on imports. Sounds good. Anything coming in the country puts a tax put on it as it crosses the border, or it's taken off the boat. Yes, but the problem there is that increases the price of goods, which means you as consumers have to pay more, right? So it hurts consumers, hurts the foreigners who are making the stuff and shipping it, be it foodstuffs or manufactured goods. It also means those nations retaliate against ours by putting up taxes against our goods. So who benefits? Manufacturers in this country. I mean, often it's not farm products, so usually it's factory-produced stuff, right? So a tariff helps the factory owner. Okay? It makes his stuff cheaper, relatively speaking, to imported goods from abroad. So businessmen, and it was all men back then, like tariffs, and they start to build factories. They bring in experts from abroad. How do we build a factory? How do we build a railroad? They actually build a railroad mostly across Russia. So this is great. Some of those poor farmers become factory workers, and when is it? It's like 1900. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, Das Kapital, and the Communist Manifesto, they've been out for about 50 years, right? So now you get factory workers. And remember what it was like working in a factory in Britain in the early decades of the Industrial Revolution. It was awful, right? So now you get that coming to Russia like all at once. You get a really unhappy group of factory workers being exploited, but also having knowledge now of revolution, like, hey, we should kill the factory owners and take over the factories and take over society. So you get a number of communists who tended not to be the factory workers so much as people like college professors who would rile them up, okay? So incomplete industrialization by 1900. There was enough factories to get the Russian government overconfident. Well, we have workers and agitators, right? Again, people who could read and had time to read Communist Manifesto, workers of the world unite, you have nothing to lose but your chains, right? To get the factory workers to go with them against the government, and basically they get lined up and shot. Okay, there's a rebellion in 1905. Anarchists are people who don't want any government. Okay, this is crushed. Okay, in 1905, very little changed. The Tsar will have a very tiny parliament that he actually controls called the Duma. It doesn't change much. So the government will actually repress intellectuals, who often were Jewish people. Right? There's a great tradition of scholarship within the Jewish community in Russia, and there'd be a lot of repression. In fact, there had been great repression. They were called pogroms, P-R-O-G-R-O-M-S, pogroms, which was persecution of Jewish people, which meant a lot of Jewish people would flee the country in the 1880s, 1890s, 1900, 1905, and end up in places like the United States and never go back again. Okay, never go back again. Not that they were always treated that well when they got to the United States, but at least there wasn't official government persecution of them. Since anti-Semitism is not something the Nazis invented. The Nazis exacerbated it, or they made it worse. Okay? What else happens in 1904, 1905? There's a war with Japan. Really, a war with Japan? Yes, a war with Japan. If we can find a good map here. That's not the map we want, John. There's a good map, okay? So over here on the east of Russia, maybe it's not such a great map because Japan's way down there at the bottom, right? The Russians, again, not the Soviets yet, these are the Russians. They're moving, here's the Trans-Siberian Railroad, choo-choo, all right? They're moving in this direction eastward. At the same time, industrializing, militarizing Japan is moving westward. We'll talk about Japan next time, but they're going to clash here, okay? The Japanese built a great navy. In fact, the British built much of it for them and taught them how to use it. The Russians were proud. Yes, we have a steamship navy too, but it wasn't as high tech, and they weren't as adept in using it. There'll be a major war over here, the Russo-Japanese War, the Russian-Japanese War. And who wins? Well, the racists of the era, which was just about everybody with light skin, including your president Teddy Roosevelt at the time, just assumed the Russians were going to win because at least the European Russians were Caucasian, right? They're light-skinned people. They're so-called superior. They'll defeat these Asian people. No. Okay, they did. Right? Japan won very handily, decimated the Russian Navy, especially the place called the Battle of Tsushima. I think I'll put up a little video on this if I can figure out how to do that technologically so you can watch it. The Russians lose, right? And much of the world was shocked. People who weren't of light skin tone and European origin were inspired, and Asian people defeated the European people. Yes, and the Russians were dismayed, okay? So the Russians lost this war against Japan, okay? Japan will, actually had by this time, already moved into Korea, will begin to move into China, okay? Which will be our next topic. Chinese Empire under siege. So let's save that for next time, which actually is Wednesday. We'll see how this goes. In the comments section, let me know how this goes. We're all trying to deal with this, so please be patient, and I thank you for your understanding. It's not how I prefer to teach. I'd rather have you folks here so I could see a furrowed brow. That means when someone doesn't understand. But until we're all together again, please put your comments in the comment section of YouTube. I will post some questions about today's lecture in the Blackboard forum, which is a discussion board, and try to answer my questions. But feel free also to pose your own, right? And answer each other's. It should be discussion among many of us, not just the instructor to the students. I'll be posting a quiz soon as we've been doing all semester, so no changes there. There's no test for a while, so let's just try to make an adjustment to the YouTube version of me. And what else can I say? I should also say that the slides will be posted on Blackboard. Look in contents for outline for this chapter. And hang in there, all right? Take it seriously, hunker down. Look, you're getting a lot of advice. Listen to it, okay? As long as it's from a legitimate source. If you feel sick, stay wherever you are. I try to stay away from people. This virus is largely spread by coughing, okay? So you should cover, your entire face if you're coughing. Try to stay, a number of feet away from people if at all possible. Watch the surfaces. One reason the campus is mostly closed is because the virus can be spread through contact. So someone's sick here, they touch this or they cough on it, and I touch it. Next thing I'm touching my eyes, my nose, I'm putting my fingers in my mouth, whatever, and I'm transmitting the virus. So again, it might not appear to be as virulent as dangerous to young people, but some of us have underlying medical conditions. We have older people in our orbit of friends and family. We certainly don't want to spread this stuff. So take it seriously, all right? Don't buy all the toilet paper, but stay well, folks. And we will see you for Wednesday morning's lecture. I'll post it on Tuesday night. All right? Take care. Bye-bye.